Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies tier list video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S all the way down to the C tier for patch 12.2. The 12.2 meta still emphasizes flexible play, but there's no denying that certain synergies have been overperforming. That said, they've released a B patch to address a few of those traits and associated champions. Because of that, take portions of this tier list with a grain of salt, as the meta still needs time to settle. We've got lots of synergies to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. At the top of our list, we have the S tier synergies, which consists of Syndicate Assassin, Enchanter Scholar, Cuddly, and Socialite. Overall, these traits are consistently finishing in the top 4 in every game and are used frequently. Starting off the S tier, we have the combination of two synergies, Syndicate and Assassin. These two traits go hand in hand, as you rarely ever see Syndicates played without Assassin, and now that Imperial's received a nerf, Syndicates are likely the go-to option when running Assassins. In any case, the Syndicate trait is there to buff up and support Shaco, Akali, and occasionally Talon. The reason for these two traits doing well is mostly because of Assassin. If the shop changes, it's more difficult for legendary champions to be 2-starred. This naturally pushes the meta downward towards level 7, where Assassins are often the strongest mid-game comp. Mix in some rerolling and you're going to see a lot of 3-star Assassins running around the meta, and Syndicate is often paired alongside them. Up next is another pair of synergies we see played together all the time, Enchanter and Scholar. At this point of set 6, it's clear that the two most common splash traits are Enchanter and Scholar. It's so easy to have both in a comp for only 2 or 3 champions, especially with the JOY trio of Janna, Orianna, and Yuumi. Turns out providing a ton of utility with healing, shields, mana generation, and CC is kinda good. And by kinda good, we mean really good, hence why these two synergies are consistently in the S tier. Speaking of Yuumi, the next synergy in the S tier is Cuddly. We want to separate Yuumi from the above pairing because it wouldn't be fair to the kitty, as she's one of the best standalone champions in the game, even if you ignore her traits. There's just not many other units that provide as much utility to a board on their own. A champion that provides CC that requires essentially no items, traits, and you don't even need a 2-star him? Yeah, Yuumi is a boss kitty. And to end the S tier, we have Socialite. Socialite being in the S tier is debatable because, let's be honest, this trait can be fake a lot of the time. Why we're keeping it here though is because of how often it gets used every game. One champion to provide a 20% damage boost to your carry sounds pretty darn good, especially when you consider Seraphine and Taric, as both of them are decent champions with heals. So while Socialite can be a bait, it's on average going to be useful. Let's move on to the A tier synergies, which consists of Challenger, Mercenary, Chemtech, Imperial, Bodyguard, Bruiser, Glutton, Arcanist, and Yordle. These are the bread and butter traits of the meta and are used in a lot of the best comps. Sitting at the tippy top is Challenger. Challenger is possibly the most consistent A tier synergy of set 6 because it almost always has a place in the meta. Providing a stat boost to auto attack carries is quite good, especially for champions like Yone, Fiora, and Kai'Sa. If you want a consistent trait to build a composition around, look no further than Old Reliable, aka Challengers. We've bumped Mercenary down a tier because of the nerfs in 12.2. While the nerfs weren't too massive, it has had an impact on the playability of Mercenaries in the meta. The trait is still viable and can swing games when a player gets a huge cash out, but maybe because of the perception of the nerfs or directly because of them, Mercenaries aren't quite as popular as last patch. Still good if you can get the ball rolling in stage 2, but maybe not an instant game winner when you get a big payout. Chemtech seems to be the big winner of 12.2 because it was one of the few traits that dodged impactful nerfs. If anything, it got better with Urgot receiving a minor buff and Victor 1 being stronger. Because of that, Urgot is a stable composition in the meta if you're looking to place in the top 4 consistently. It's definitely not as easy to win with as some of the other synergies, but overall, it's a solid A tier trait. The controversial trait of the tier list is of course Imperial, because no one knows yet exactly how much the nerfs will impact it. It's easy to say the trait is significantly weaker because the trait itself was nerfed alongside Swain and Talon, but that's not always the case. Anyway, due to how up in the air Imperial is right now, we're cautiously putting it in the A tier, though it may be weaker or stronger depending on how the meta develops. Bodyguard is still the quintessential frontline of the meta, though less because of the trait and more because of Braum. Leona is also decent, particularly in melee comps, as she can buff the defense of nearby allies. But overall, if you're running Bodyguard beyond the early game, the reason is likely because you found Braum. Bruiser is just slightly behind in value to Bodyguard as frontline, and the value of this synergy is mainly tied to Chemtech. It's also partially tied to Mutant because of Cho'Gath 3, but guess who just got nerfed? Yep, Cho'Gath. Tahm Kench is also not quite as powerful as he was before, so while Bruisers are doing well thanks to Chemtech, they've definitely taken a few blows from the nerf bat. As we just mentioned the Demon Catfish, our next synergy is Glutton. If If you hit the Kench early into stage 4, then yes, you do not want to bench the Kench because he will farm you a lot of components and gold. But the later the game goes, the less value he will bring, so Tahm Kench is in a weird spot as a 5-cost champion where he's better earlier in the game than later. It's an odd place to be for Kench, but overall he is still viable. While AP compositions are struggling, Arcanist is holding its own well enough in the meta. It can be difficult to consistently place higher than 3rd or 4th with Arcanist, but Lux as a carry still gets the job done. And Victor 1 is stronger, so the stage 5 power spike of Arcanist is quite good. Overall, Arcanists are the most consistent AP option, but they don't hit the same highs as other meta comps. Ending the A tier, we have Yordle. Yordle as a composition is still a joke unless you're Omega high rolling. That said, if you use Yordles for Econ, they are still quite good, assuming you have the trait active in stage 2. In fact, it's becoming the replacement Econ trait to Mercenaries. Having the Econ trait is great, but we definitely don't recommend utilizing it as a full composition. Moving on, let's talk about the B tier traits. This tier consists of Scrap, Innovator, Transformer, Mutant, Academy, Twinshot, Clockwork, Enforcer, and Protector. These synergies are situational or played because they pair well with one of the upper tier traits. These aren't necessarily bad or weak, just inconsistent. Starting off the B tier, we have Scrap. Scrap is an interesting synergy because it can be amazing even later on in the game. Other times, it's barely evil to scrap by in the early game. A lot of it comes down to your augments, how quickly you can get 4 or 6 scrap, and how many 2-star champions you have. Scrap is definitely one of the more inconsistent traits in the game because of those reasons. That said, we do recommend using it early in the game, and even taking a scrap augment can be a good way to start a win streak. Innovator is in a similar position as Scrap, which makes sense as these two synergies are often paired together. Early on in the game, Innovator can be great with an additional unit on the board. But as the game goes on, Innovator begins to lose a lot of value unless you're hitting upgrades, finding Seraphine, or high rolling an early Jace. Innovator also benefits a lot from Emblem and Heart augments as well as trait-specific augments like Self-Repair. Without those, it's much harder to stabilize a mid to late game with an Innovator board. Much like Scrap, Innovator is too inconsistent to be rated higher in the meta, though it does have potential to do well. Piggybacking off of Innovator, we have Transformer or Jace. Jace is in a decent spot right now, though the reduced odds of legendaries at level 8 definitely hurt his viability. Jace 1 isn't particularly special unless you need him for Innovator, while Jace 2 is actually quite good as a carry or frontliner. But because of his reliance on being 2-starred and having relatively niche compositions to do well in, we sadly had to put Jace down here in the B tier. Mutant is by far the hardest synergy to place on the tier list because the mutations vary greatly in value. There also tends to be a lack of a proper carry for mutants as Kog'Maw does his own thing and doesn't really need Mutant, and Kai'Sa has to be level 2 to truly carry. Cho'Gath 3 was doing well, but they promptly took care of that with the B-patch nerfs. That means a lot of the time, the best carry for Mutant is with an emblem. On top of that, the mutation has to be a good one as well. Because there are so many parameters for Mutant to succeed, it lacks consistency, and lacking consistency is exactly what makes a trait get placed in the B tier. Next up is Academy. Academy does well when it's needed, especially for Yone, Katarina, and occasionally Lux. Outside of those situations, it, well, isn't great. You can't be too harsh on it because a lot of the Academy champions are doing well in the meta, but let's just say we won't miss this trait once removed from the mid set. Twinshot is in the same boat as Academy since it primarily gets used by specific champions, namely Urgot and Kog'Maw. Outside of that, it's almost never used unless by accident. For Urgot and Kog'Maw, Twinshot is great. It's a nice boost in their damage. Only being useful for 2 champions doesn't make for a great synergy though, so it will likely remain down in the B tier for the foreseeable future. It pains us to put Clockwork so low on the tier list, but outside of Orianna, what does Clockwork really have going for it? Sure, Jhin can do well, but does Clockwork really matter for that composition? The main problem is that to have Clockwork be impactful, you need 4 of the trait, and having 4 is rare unless you're spending an augment for it. That said, we really do like Clockwork, it's just in a weird place right now in the meta where it doesn't provide nearly as much as it should. Enforcer is okay. That's the best way to describe it. It's not terrible, but it's not terribly useful either. Much like Clockwork, if 4 Enforcer was reliable to use, the synergy would likely be praised more. As is, it's just an occasionally helpful utility synergy. And ending the B tier, we have Protector. Protector can be amazing, but to be amazed, you need something like an emblem to put on another champion. There is the Kog'Maw Protector composition, but 2 Protector really isn't doing that much. Because it relies so much on having an emblem to be relevant outside of one specific composition, we have to put it down at the bottom of the B tier. With that, we're into the last tier, the C tier. This tier consists of Sniper, Colossus, Sister, and Yordle Lord. Basically, these synergies are either barely useful or incredibly niche. First up is Sniper. We flip-flop a lot on the value of Sniper, but with Jhin falling a bit out of grace, there's rarely an instance in the meta that Sniper truly does well. There's certain examples of sniper compositions doing well, but those are mainly outliers. That said, Sniper's Nest does elevate this synergy slightly higher, and we do have to acknowledge sniper compositions as being viable. Colossus. Honestly, Colossus could be a really cool synergy because of how unique it is. In actuality, it's just a balancing nightmare. Having champions be stronger because they take up 2 spots means they are rarely going to be average in value. Either they're too strong or too weak. Sion does sit in the middle of that, but that's mainly because of his CC and amazing targeting AI. Overall, Colossus is a synergy that would benefit from being removed in the mid set. Even if they add more units like Sion, it's rare to ever want to commit 4 of your board spaces to just 2 units. Sister is still just not a useful synergy. Sure, it's fine to have active if you're using Jinx, but why are you using Jinx? Jinx is rarely a good champion unless you're super high rolling. Maybe they'll make Jinx viable in future patches, but for now, Sister as the synergy can basically be glossed over entirely. And to finish off our tier list, we have the fakest trait in the game, Yordle Lord. Vigar is a meme. That's really all there is to be said about the Yordle Lord synergy. Occasionally, you may see Vigar being useful with a 6 Yordle composition, but even then, Vigar is not the main carry. And that's all we have for today's tier list video, folks. Overall, the meta is still diverse, though we do admit there's definitely a large emphasis on assassins and rerolling that skews the upper end of the meta. Let us know in the comment section below what synergies you've been having the most success with. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.